What if I told you the most dangerous nuclear standoff of our time didn't end with a treaty, but with a whisper? Not with a signed document, not with a press conference, but with a single phrase buried in a foreign language proposal that most Americans will never read. Right now, as you watch this, the bombs have stopped falling. The skies over Tehran are silent. But in the quiet, something far more unsettling is happening. A deal was made, and the central question, the one that triggered 40 days of bombing, the one that pushed two nations to the edge of war, that question is still open. It's still being negotiated. And the answer, if it goes the way the evidence suggests, could fundamentally redraw the balance of power in the Middle East for a generation. Nobody's giving you the full picture. So let's walk through what we actually know, what is being hidden, and why the next 14 days could decide everything. Before we go deeper, I need you to do something right now. Look at the screen. If you care about understanding the real story behind the headlines, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to wake up and show this to more people. Subscribe and ring the bell because I don't just report the news, I connect the dots that others are too afraid to touch. Let's build a community that sees through the spin. Done? Good. Let's begin with a simple truth about how power works. Wars do not end for free. That is a law of physics and geopolitics. Somebody pays, somebody gains. Every ceasefire carries a price tag written in concessions, in territory and leverage. The bigger the war, the bigger the bill. And this was not a small conflict. This was 40 days of American military fury. Billions of dollars in precision munitions dropped on hardened targets. Military planners in Washington calculated the cost, not just in dollars, but in blood, in diplomatic capital, in long-term strategic positioning. So when the guns abruptly fell silent on April 8th, the first question any thinking person should ask is not how nice is peace? It's what just changed hands? Because something did. Something always does. The official narrative is clean. President Trump announced the deal on Truth Social. The missiles stopped. Diplomats smiled for cameras in Islamabad. Life moves on, the news cycle spins forward, and everyone is supposed to feel relieved. But here is where the story fractures. Think about what happened next. No official written agreement was released. Not a single page, not a signed document, not a verified text published for public scrutiny. The most consequential Middle East deal in decades, and it exists only in competing statements, contradictory claims, and closed-door assurances. Two governments pointing at each other saying, "That's not what we agreed to." That's not a peace process. That's a powder keg with a silk ribbon tied around it. Then Iran did something clever, something strategically brilliant and deeply alarming. They released their own version, a 10-point ceasefire proposal published in Persian, circulated to their domestic audience and regional allies. And buried inside that Persian text, in language that does not appear in any English version, was a phrase that sent a cold shock through intelligence circles in Washington. The phrase claims, and I quote the translation, "The United States has in principle committed to the acceptance of Iran's right to enrich uranium." Read that again. Let it settle. Iran is not claiming a temporary pause, not a delay, not a vague understanding. They are claiming America agreed in principle to let them keep enriching uranium, the very activity that brought the bombers in the first place, the reddest of red lines. The White House response came fast. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt dismissed the public 10-point plan as unserious. She insisted Trump's red line, the complete end of uranium enrichment in Iran, has not changed. But here is what she did not do. She did not produce a document. She did not offer details. She offered zero specifics about what the private deal actually says. A private deal. A secret text. Two completely different versions of the same supposed agreement existing in two different languages. This is not a miscommunication. This is not a translation error. This is a deliberate ambiguity that benefits one side more than the other. In negotiations, the side that controls the ambiguity controls the outcome. This is where you need to pause and genuinely evaluate if the information you're getting from mainstream sources is complete. If this video is already filling gaps for you, imagine what else you're missing. Share this video with one person who needs to understand what's happening, not tomorrow, today. Let's light up the conversation before the 14-day clock runs out. Now the story gets stranger. Vice President J.D. Vance made a startling admission on Wednesday. He revealed there are actually 3 different 10-point proposals circulating in diplomatic channels. 3 versions of the same deal. Think about that. He said the first one was probably written by ChatGPT. The second was Iran's public version, the one with the enrichment clause. And the third, the one actually forming the basis of the real ground-level negotiations, has not been released to the public at all. So the document that ended the actual fighting, the real agreement, the one that governs what happens on the ground right now, is a secret. You are not allowed to see it. Congress is not allowed to see it in any meaningful public way. The American public, whose sons and daughters fly those missions, whose tax dollars funded every bomb, is flying completely blind. And Iran's parliament speaker is already out in public, claiming the United States has violated the ceasefire on 3 separate points, including specifically Iran's right to enrichment. He is not guessing. He is citing the secret document, the one you can't read. Let's talk about the uranium itself, because this is the molten core of the entire crisis. By December 2024, the International Atomic Energy Agency had reported an unprecedented stockpile of highly enriched uranium inside Iran. Their inspectors documented quantities with no credible civilian purpose, quantities that give Iran the technical capacity to produce enough fissile material for multiple nuclear weapons. Not one, multiple. This is not speculation from think tanks. This is the IAEA's own verified reporting. That stockpile did not vanish when the first Tomahawk missile left its launch tube. It wasn't vaporized by bunker-busting bombs, which mostly targeted military infrastructure, not dispersed nuclear material. The uranium is still there, sitting, waiting. And the man who has to answer for it is President Trump. Here is what he said after the ceasefire. Pay very close attention to his exact wording, because words in diplomacy are not casual. They are contract. Trump told AFP news agency that Iran's uranium will be, and these are his words, perfectly taken care of. He said, that will be perfectly taken care of, or I wouldn't have settled. That was the statement. No details, no timeline, no mechanism, no definition of what perfectly taken care of actually means. Does it mean dismantled, shipped out, stored under international supervision? Oh, nobody knows. A man famous for cutting deals just told the world the nuclear stockpile is handled. Trust him. Intelligence analysts are not trusting that. They are digging. And what they are finding suggests a very different reality behind the closed doors in Islamabad. Confidential reports from regional sources paint a picture of Iran entering these talks with one non-negotiable pillar, one demand they would never surrender: the right to enrich. Tehran's foreign ministry has made it abundantly clear, repeatedly over many years, that any deal stripping Iran of its enrichment program is a deal Iran will not sign. Full stop. This is not a bluff. This is the central ideological and strategic pillar of the Iranian state's identity. They have invested a century's worth of national pride and treasure into the nuclear fuel cycle. Iran expert Trita Parsi put it bluntly. He said the question of enrichment was the exact point that caused negotiations to collapse in February. And he said Iran would want to make sure Trump surrenders this point. Surrenders. That was the word chosen by a seasoned analyst who tracks Iranian negotiating behavior. Not compromises, not negotiates, surrenders. That is the frame Iran brought to the table. And the ceasefire happened. 40 days of bombing. And the ceasefire happened. So let's consolidate what we know so far. The guns stopped with no public document. The central question of uranium enrichment is unanswered and by some accounts already conceded. Iran's version of reality says America accepted enrichment. America's public version says it did not. The actual private document, the one that physically dictates behavior on the ground, is locked away from public view. And the Vice President of the United States has admitted there are multiple conflicting drafts. If this were a business deal, you would call it fraud. If it were a legal contract, you would sue for clarity. In geopolitics, you call it a recipe for war. Now let's zoom out, because this ceasefire did not emerge from a vacuum. It was midwifed by extreme pressure. On April 7th, Trump issued a warning that belongs in the annals of presidential rhetoric. He said, "A whole civilization will die tonight if Iran did not agree to a deal by midnight." A civilizational threat. Not a threat against a regime, not a threat against military assets. A whole civilization. That is maximum pressure with the clock ticking. And then, exactly what you'd expect in a high-stakes poker game, a deal. 2 weeks of ceasefire, done. It sounds like American strength. It sounds like a commander-in-chief forcing the enemy to capitulate. But now look at what Iran actually got out of this moment of apparent weakness. Their 10-point proposal, the one Trump himself called a workable basis for negotiation, includes terms that are staggering in scope. Continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, complete withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, lifting of all sanctions, both nuclear and non-nuclear, and the formal recognition of Iran's right to enrich uranium. Trump's team walked back the endorsement, but the fact that a sitting U.S. president looked at a document demanding the withdrawal of American forces from the Middle East and called it workable tells you something profound about the pressure Washington felt. Pressure to stop the shooting, pressure to claim a win, pressure to get out of a cycle of escalation before it spiraled into something far worse than airstrikes. At this exact moment, I need to ask you directly. If you've made it this far, you're not a casual observer. You're someone who wants the truth beneath the headlines. So support this kind of independent analysis. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. I release deep dives that the mainstream simply won't touch. And share this. The algorithm alone won't spread the truth. You have to be the signal. Let's keep pushing. Now, a new leak emerges, and this one comes from Capitol Hill itself, from inside Trump's own political alliance. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the president's closest allies, a man who speaks to the White House regularly, came out immediately after the ceasefire and issued a direct public warning. He did not celebrate the deal. He did not praise the diplomacy. He warned. He said, allowing Iran to enrich uranium in the future would be an affront to all those murdered by the regime and would be inconsistent with denying Iran a pathway toward a bomb. Notice the careful wording. Graham is not warning about what Iran might demand hypothetically in the future. He is warning about what Trump might give them now in these talks, behind those closed doors. That is a senator, an ally, publicly begging the president of his own party not to hand the enemy the one nuclear concession that makes a mockery of all the sacrifices made. That warning does not exist in reality unless the concession is actively on the table. You don't warn against something nobody's considering. You warn because you see the train coming and you're trying to throw the switch. And then there is Israel. Israel is not a cheerleader for this process. Israel is a terrified observer with excellent intelligence. Netanyahu delivered to Trump his non-negotiable demands before any negotiations started. They were clear. Iran's ability to enrich uranium must be eliminated entirely. Its ballistic missile program, the delivery systems for any future bomb, must be stopped. Its regional proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shia militias in Iraq, must be systematically reined in. Israel worked overnight with the U.S., specifically to ensure that Iran's demand to include Lebanon in the ceasefire was rejected. That was a tactical win. Lebanon stays out. But the uranium question, the foundational existential question for Israel, is still open, still being negotiated, still behind closed doors in Islamabad right now, today, as you watch these words. For Israel, this is not a geopolitical chess match. It's a matter of survival. And they are watching Washington bargain over the engine of a potential second Holocaust. That is the emotional reality underpinning the diplomatic cables. Let's talk about what the next 14 days actually represent. The 2-week ceasefire is not peace. Do not misunderstand the quiet. It is a pressure cooker with the lid screwed tightly on. Analysts across the region have described this as a very ambiguous ceasefire agreement that is extremely shaky and brittle. Iran's demands are maximalist. They are not designed to be easily implemented. They are designed to trap the other side in a contradiction. Iran knows it. America knows it. Every intelligence service in the region knows it. The ceasefire is not a resolution. It is an intermission. And the chief of Iran's nuclear program made a statement after the announcement that removed all doubt about where Tehran believes power truly lies. He said any attempt to limit Iran's enrichment of uranium would fail. Not that Iran would resist, not that Iran would negotiate in good faith. It would fail. Full stop. That is a man who believes he has already won. That is a man speaking from a position of confidence, not fear. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing something the rest of us do not. The kind of confidence that comes from reading the secret document. And there is one more piece to this puzzle. A confidential element that has received almost no attention in Western media, but which changes the entire strategic calculus. Trump stated publicly that he believes China helped push Iran toward the ceasefire. China's embassy in Washington confirmed Beijing had been working behind the scenes to help bring about a deal. China, Iran's largest oil buyer, Iran's economic lifeline through years of brutal sanctions. China was in the room, influencing the outcome, whispering in ears, calculating its own long game. Now ask yourself a series of questions. Who benefits strategically if Iran gets to keep enriching uranium? Who benefits if American forces are pushed further and further from the Persian Gulf? Who has been systematically expanding its naval footprint, its economic influence, its political alliances across every single country from which America has retreated in the last decade? The shooting stopped, yes, but the war for the Middle East did not end. It simply moved indoors. Into the negotiating rooms in Islamabad where the cameras cannot go, where the documents do not get released, and where the real winners and losers are being carved into the stone of history. Here is the bottom line. The United States went to war to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The justification was clear, stated repeatedly from the highest podiums in the land. 40 days of bombing, billions in munitions spent, lives lost, regional alliances strained. And right now, today, the question of whether Iran gets to keep enriching uranium, the very pathway to a bomb, is still being negotiated, still unanswered. The uranium stockpile that Trump said would be perfectly taken care of is still sitting in Iran, untouched, unverified, unsecured by any international mechanism. Iran's parliament speaker is publicly claiming the U.S. already agreed to enrichment, and nobody in Washington has shown a single document proving otherwise. Not one. Because there is no public document. Because the deal that was supposed to take the uranium away has not been seen by anyone outside a tiny circle of negotiators. Nobody can verify it, nobody can challenge it. And the clock is running. 14 days. Watch Islamabad, watch the uranium. And watch what Washington admits or refuses to admit when those 2 weeks are up. Because if Iran walks away from these talks, still enriching, still spinning centrifuges, still building capacity, the history books will not call this a ceasefire. They will not write poetry about peace. They will record a moment when the world's most powerful military bombed a country for 40 days, stopped, and left the enemy's core capability intact. They will call it a surrender dressed up in diplomatic language. And you heard it here first. The quiet is not safety. The quiet is the sound of a clock ticking on something far more dangerous than war. The quiet is the sound of a concession being tested for public reaction. Pay attention. The story is not over. It has simply moved into the shadows. Stay alert, stay informed, and never stop asking what they're not showing you.